You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Well, wouldn't you just know it? There are even more things to discuss regarding the Trump-Zelensky Ukraine-United States mineral deal fallout from Friday. I know, clearly, we all expected that would just be some one and done, lock it in news story. We'd all go home, we'd sleep through the weekend, and then presto, we'd be in a brand new week and everything would be peaches, roses, and wonderful. No, that's not the case at all. The Trump-Zelensky-Ukraine situation is getting weirder by the minute. And I want to make this clear up front. It's not only getting weirder by the minute for the actors involved with the story. It's getting weirder by the minute because of the actors who have takes about the situation. So what do I mean? This is not your traditional left versus right or populist Republican versus establishment Republican kind of debate. No. In fact, one of the key critics right now of Zelensky is Mark Thiessen, a Washington Post columnist and a big supporter of Ukraine, who is continually laying out that Zelensky has made it so much worse for the people of Ukraine by his actions, not only Friday, but since. So what are some of these actions? Well, the conflicting messages would be a huge one. So today, at about 12:51 Eastern, Zelensky posted, "We continue our work with partners. We've already had talks and other steps to come soon. It is very important that we try to make our diplomacy really substantive to end this war as soon as possible. We need real peace, and Ukrainians want it most because the war ruins our cities and towns. We lose our people. We need to stop the war and to guarantee security. We are working together with America and our European partners and very much hope on U.S. support on the path to peace. Peace is needed as soon as possible." The problem is that this is very, very discordant with other comments that he's made. And by very, very discordant, I mean Zelensky says that, we really want peace in Ukraine. This is something that we're really looking for to end this. And then when it comes to the terms of peace and negotiation and compromise, now he's not willing to do any of that. So this is according to the Associated Press. Zelensky said that the possible end to the war is still very, very far away. He's also reiterated that he's not willing to give any kind of concessions at all to Russia, which puts anyone negotiating an end to the war in a very difficult spot. But anyway, here's President Trump responding to Zelensky's kind of flip-flopping on this today.
President Zelensky supposedly made a statement today in AP. I'm not a big fan of AP, so maybe it was an incorrect statement, but he said he thinks the war's going to go on for a long time. And he better not be right about that. That's all I'm saying.
So there really is just a strange set of circumstances funneling all the way down on Zelensky's flip-flopping and what he wants from Europe and what he wants from the United States. There's a lot of questions in everywhere, shape, and form. The point that can be at least illustrated so far is that there is not going to be any deal on the horizon because at the present time, the White House doesn't believe that Zelensky wants peace. The White House currently believes, according to reporters at least, that Zelensky is trying to pit powers against each other to see what he can get out of it. That seems to be the White House opinion.
I have been told by a senior official here that nothing's going to happen with this minerals deal until Zelensky goes in front of cameras and makes an explicit public apology for the way that he behaved himself, behaved in the Oval Office with that meeting.
Now, what's the reason that Zelensky, behaved this way? Why? How could he? Why did he? How could he? All of this thing that you see in the responses from many people around the world who supported Ukraine. A report came out that was, at least it began as kind of a rumor, that before Volodymyr Zelensky met with Trump and Vance in front of the media, that he was sitting down with all of these anti-Trump, anti-Republican, to the left Democrats. And there was a rumor that it was Barack Obama and it was Susan Rice and it was all of these, Democrat senators. That's not quite true. He did, however, sit down and meet with a lot of Democrat senators and then 3 Republicans. So Zelensky sat down with Amy Klobuchar, Jackie Rosen, Richard Blumenthal, Chris Murphy, Peter Welch, Sheldon Whitehouse, and Chris Van Hollen, along with Lindsey Graham, Roger Wicker, and Charles Grassley. This is a problem because it appears if Zelensky met with these senators before he went to meet with Trump, that these senators gave him the advice to act how he did, and getting in that, basically picking that fight with Vice President J.D. Vance and then showboating in front of the media for it. Now, the real funny part is Chris Murphy of Connecticut's response to Zelensky and Trump, their fallout in the Oval Office. Check this out. It's a little bit much.
So it is absolutely shameful what is happening right now. The White House has become an arm of the Kremlin. Every single day, you hear from the National Security Advisor, from the President of the United States, from his entire national security team, Kremlin talking points. For the last week, the White House has been pretending as if Ukraine started this war. That's essentially saying that Poland invaded Germany at the beginning of World War II. There are still facts in this world. And the fact is this: Vladimir Putin is a brutal dictator. Russia started this war. And the entire pretext for that meeting yesterday was an attempt to rewrite history in order to sign a deal with Putin that hands Putin Ukraine.
Okay, did you catch it? So Chris Murphy made a couple of things very clear. First and foremost, Chris Murphy did not like the deal. He didn't like the deal. He thinks that if Trump signs this mineral deal with Ukraine, then that somehow gives Ukraine to Russia. Or perhaps Chris Murphy is alluding to if Donald Trump signs a peace deal with Russia, because again, Ukraine cannot broker peace with Russia. Ukraine is losing the war too badly to broker a ceasefire and a peace deal. Putin thinks he can conquer it. So the only country who can stop Putin from conquering the rest of Ukraine and broker peace and set up a long-term solution is the United States and its chief executive, the President of the United States. So Chris Murphy doesn't like the deal. He also is very angry at Donald Trump and thinks he's some kind of a Kremlin agent. So if this is the guy that you meet with before you head into your meeting with Trump and Vance, how did you think that was going to go? And by the way, I do want to make this perfectly clear. J.D. Vance's accusation that Zelensky was a bad faith actor, Vance's accusation that Zelensky was a bad faith actor because Zelensky went in October of last year with Democrat Governor Josh Shapiro to tour Pennsylvania on kind of a sort of pseudo campaign trail for Kamala Harris, touring munitions factories. Now this lands a little bit more closely to home. If he's taking advice from Democrat senators, and I don't know where Graham or Grassley were in this conversation, but apparently, at least this is according to the information that we've received so far from sources reporting on the matter, they were present, at least for part of it. Chris Murphy looks like he sidetracked the whole meeting, threw it right into the dumpster, and then got on TV to complain how this is all Trump's fault. And now Zelensky has gone around the world to make matters worse with the United States. For a guy who supposedly needs the aid of the United States, it looks an awful lot like he doesn't want the deal to go through with the United States so he can somehow talk Europe into backing him immediately with boots on the ground today, which may not happen yet. But in the meantime, President Trump has now halted all weapon sales and military aid to Ukraine. So at this second, according to the Wall Street Journal, and this is developing again by the minute here, President Donald Trump has ordered no additional military aid to the Ukraine. And he is also reviewing certain sanctions currently in place against Russia. Now, this is clearly diplomatic pressure. It is, because Zelensky is basically walking around with a middle finger in the air to anyone who says you might have to compromise to finish this war. Now, there are some on the establishment right who suggest that actually the move here is to go up to Putin and say, you need to step down, you're a sturdy, stinking dictator, and we'll kick you in the teeth if you don't. Russia is not Iraq. Could the United States beat Russia in a war? Absolutely. Would that be a vastly different military conflict than one with Saddam Hussein, for instance? Yes, it would. And so everyone who thinks that we just need to walk up and tell Putin, no, don't do it. must have forgotten that that didn't work during the Obama and Biden administrations.
That spring is almost here in.
So, moving on a little bit forward here. Sorry, little commercial cut in there. Democrats are being extremely strange about the situation. None are being perhaps more gross about how they view Ukrainians on the battlefield than Representative Eric Swalwell, again, who is known, among many things in life, for being duped by a particular Chinese spy. So here's how Swalwell views things.
If you look around the world, our biggest economic enemy is China. Our biggest geopolitical enemy is Russia. In a matter of 3 years, without losing a single U.S. soldier, we have decimated their military and their economy. It's been the greatest return on investment for any military expenditure ever. And as far as the return on investment for soldiers' lives, it's infinity, because you can't divide zero.
So what he is saying is that it is better to finance Ukraine to fight on behalf of Russia because no U.S. troops are lost, which, by the way, I agree that it's good that no U.S. troops are being lost. Obviously, every country wants to prevent the death of its citizens. Excuse me, every state except for Palestine wants to prevent the death of its citizens. But in this particular context, in this particular instance, it's a little bit hollow coming from from Representative Eric Swalwell. And the reason it's becoming just a little bit hollow in this particular case is because he's talking so flippantly, dividing by zero. Oh, well, of course we'd rather do this. He's saying that, well, actually, it really is no big deal if a bunch of Ukrainian people die. No, that's not okay either. The best thing for the Ukrainian people in this particular situation is a long-standing economic deal from the United States. And this long-standing deal from the United States that puts boots on the ground in a way that harkens all the way back to Thomas Jefferson's presidency would create an economic barrier between Russia and imperialism to the West. Whereas, again, just sticking NATO bases closer and closer and closer doesn't make the tin pot dictator over in Russia particularly happy. And throwing his weight around, I know, an ex-KGB agent, throwing his weight around is, kind of a shocking thing, doesn't seem to be working. So it's expected that Trump is going to address this rather head on in his speech tomorrow evening. And he is advertising this, which is kind of a State of the Union. It's not quite a State of the Union address, but it's close enough. This particular speech that Trump is going to give before a combined session of Congress is supposed to be focused on the reforming of the American dream. That's what he's announced. This is what Fox News, CBS, ABC are reporting, that the topic and outline of Trump's speech is about how he plans to drive forward the U.S. economy, U.S. security, and the ending of certain crises, for example, like illegal immigration, which under the Trump administration is so far next to nil. Under the Biden administration, from month to month, we saw hundreds of thousands of illegal immigration border encounters along the southern border. And, forget the individuals that we have no idea where they came from, when they went through, or where they ended up. Now, under the Trump administration, those numbers are down to about 8,000. That is, in fact, completely reducing a crisis. The economic side of things are a bit more tricky. And so we're going to talk about some of those economic situations regarding tariffs, which for Trump, it's a pretty serious gamble. We'll have to see if it plays out. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. We'll be back in just a second.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Feels like I'm losing it.
Welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast. Whether you're joining us via our radio or TV syndication partners, the live streams on YouTube and X, which I'm probably the most fond of, just to be real with you, or the podcast uploaded a bit later. The tariff threats and the tariffs going into effect or about to go into effect, and Trump's economic international policy have got the markets doing the loop-de-loops. And it really was not good to the Dow, to the S&P 500 today, to the NASDAQ, after President Trump announced that he would be confirming the 25% tariffs on both Canada and Mexico starting tomorrow. Here's the President of the United States.
On the tariffs, is there any room left for Canada and Mexico to make a deal before midnight? And should we expect those Chinese tariffs, the extra 10%, to take
No
effect?
room left for Mexico or for Canada. No, the tariffs, they're all set. They go into effect tomorrow.
Mr. President, just to follow up on my colleague's question.
And just so you understand, vast amounts of fentanyl have poured into our country from Mexico. And as you know, also from China, where it goes to Mexico and goes to Canada. And China also had an additional 10, so it's 10 plus 10. And it comes in from Canada and it comes in from Mexico. And that's a very important thing to say. Yeah, please, go ahead.
So Trump announcing, again, that the tariffs, the 25% tariffs, are going into effect on Mexico and on Canada because Trump says they have not done enough to combat the influx of fentanyl into the United States. As well, a doubling of the current tariff on goods to China at 10% to 20%. And so the market, recognizing that a large majority of United States trade involves Mexico, Canada, and China, responded accordingly. And did very, very poorly. Now, that's the bad side of trade, on the trade tariffs. As a long-standing economic policy, tariffs do not work if people are still being taxed in their country. Allow me to explain. Tariffs are a tax. They are a tax in a different way than the income and the sales and the property taxes, among the 850 other kinds of taxes Americans pay to their local authority, to the state authority, and to the federal authorities. Tariffs are a different kind of tax. So tariffs as a system work and can work rather well if there aren't sales taxes, property taxes, and income taxes that Americans are already paying. If you add tariffs as a standard economic policy to the United States right now, again, just like right now, how it isn't easy to go out and get a couple of dozen laying hens and have them start popping out eggs to supplement the high egg prices right away because it takes time to breed the chickens and isolate them away from any kind of avian bird flu and get egg production up to speed, where then increased supply means demand would lower, so you'd have lower prices. Tariffs don't magically change the supply or the demand of the product. The factory or the refinery or what other entity is part of the supply chain of that good or resource still exists in that area. It will take time to catch up. And so it does become a tax on the individual purchasing the good, as well as the country selling the good to the United States. And so if you add the income tax, the property tax, the sales tax, and then the tariff tax to what it is that you're purchasing, that is going to cause a very serious amount of pain in the economy. Now, if a lot of the tax system of the United States, and therefore the entitlement programs, like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, massive drains on the economy, if those weren't present, then tariffs would make a lot of sense, because then they can change geopolitically very quickly. There's a lot of stability in the market itself. Now, Trump has so far used tariffs as a diplomatic arm. I want something. The leader says no, because the leader hasn't had to give any leeway to America because it hasn't actually functioned in a hegemonic force over the last couple of decades. What, you think George Bush was talking tough to Colombia? You think Barack Obama was giving China the business? I mean, he was giving China business, but I digress. Trump has used economic tariffs to threaten countries into doing what is best for United States alternative policy. So, for example, with Colombia, who didn't want to take back illegal immigrants from Colombia, Trump threatened a 50% tariff. And then within hours, the president was like, oh, okay, actually, I'm sorry, and here's my personal plane. The same thing happened with Panama, and originally with Mexico and with Canada. But Trump decided it wasn't enough. And so he leveraged it again. Now, at some point, the countries that we are in a trade war with do have to feel the ramifications of said trade war. And they can, put up a tough talk. And by the way, here's Premier Doug Ford, which sounds like a very made-up character, suggesting that Ontario is going to cut off power to hundreds of thousands of America, as well as the supply of nickel.
We are the largest purchaser of alcohol in the world. We buy over 3,600 products from 35 states.
By the way, I do want to point out that it's really funny that the United States is importing power and nickel, and Canada's like, yeah, but we drink a lot. I'm sorry. Go on, Doug Ford.
I talked to the governor of Kentucky and Mitch McConnell. Don't touch our bourbon. I'm going after absolutely everything. And I don't want to. We keep the lights on to 1.5 million homes and manufacturing in New York, in Michigan, and in Minnesota. If he wants to destroy our economy and our families, I will shut down the electricity going down to the U.S. And I'm telling you, we will do it. It's unfortunate. I would rather ship you more electricity, ship you more critical minerals. I want to ship you more energy, more potash to keep your farmers going, and uranium that you use for your nuclear power. It comes through from Saskatchewan over to Ontario.
All right, so he's going to go off on a long tangent because he's like Canadian Tim Walz. By the way, who has announced that he might be running for president in 2028. Because Tim Walz was apparently a phenomenal pick for Democrats. Oh, please, Lord, please let Democrats pick Tim Walz in 2028. It would be so funny. I would love to see J.D. Vance and Tim Walz back on the debate stage. Oh, the joy in my heart. Now, as far as tariffs are concerned, that's the rough side. The rough side is that it is, in fact, detrimental to the economy long term if current taxes and spending are already in place. And Republicans are not cutting the spending. They're not. Republicans get in Congress, and then all of a sudden hey, we're not going to spend as much. Hold on. Yeah, okay. So, what are some of the good things, though? Because there are some good things. Trump's tariff leverage has resulted in some positives. That's why this is a gamble. We don't know how it's going to turn out yet. Honda has announced that instead of building their Civics in Mexico, that instead it would be moving all of the Honda Civic production to Indiana, to just about 20, 30 miles south of yours truly. And that's fantastic. As a child who grew up when his dad's job left, and my dad worked at the Dana Corporation, and that job left to Mexico, that put our family through some really rough and terrible times. And a lot of kids in the Rust Belt and their parents who worked in those jobs that were then shipped overseas because of unmitigated free trade agreements and bad economic policy do in fact have negative consequences. And so now, again, Trump's tariff threats have started moving international business back into the United States. The question is going to be, are the American people willing to suffer the temporary economic hardships of higher inflation, higher cost at the grocery store and the gas pump through midterms in the next election? If you know anything about the attention span and memory of Americans, the answer to that is absolutely not. So it's a gamble. Will it work in time? Will Trump end up pulling some of the tariffs away to say, hey, as long as you keep funneling business into the United States, we won't do these tariffs. Taiwan as well. President Trump has also orchestrated an over $100 billion investment from the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. We'll let the radio folks head to break for just a second. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast. All right, while the radio folks are at break, let's talk a little bit about TSMC. I remember being told, and by the way, I was among one of the people doing the telling, that Trump suggesting Taiwan needed to move its semiconductor manufacturing to the United States. I remember saying that's a bad idea because it's giving Z an idea that we don't value Taiwan as a national defense point of interest because communists suck. And I was one of the people who wasn't quite sure of that particular move. Now, the largest semiconductor manufacturing company on planet Earth, which, by the way, is a vital national security asset, is investing $100 billion into the United States, into building particular industries in Arizona. I think this is a good move. I think this is a positive ramification of the tariff threats, which means two things. Number one, I'm not always right. And even if I, like you, like everyone out there, may not always completely agree or disagree with the strategies that Trump uses, sometimes it can work for the good. Sometimes, however, that ain't the case, as we saw with the market today. So what does this mean moving forward? I don't know how this gamble is going to work out. I know how I'm hopeful for it. I'm hopeful that Trump is using tariffs as a diplomatic lever, and that when he gets up in front of the country and says, and I quote, "Tariffs are my fourth favorite word in the English language," end quote, that he's suggesting that he wants an alternative means of income for the United States before we move to that procedure. Or when I mean income for the United States, I mean taxation, which is not governmental income. I really disagree with the framing of it. Taxation is theft, amen. So if we're going to look at how the next couple of months are going to work with the economy, I'm waiting on the edge of my seat, uncomfortably so. I'm not going to give you a prediction whether it's going to succeed or fail, because we're reading tea leaves at this point. Now, I'm the guy who made the Trump cycle, in which Trump says something, he says something boisterous, the media says it isn't going to work, and then Trump ends up getting a version of what he wants. Great, excellent, fantastic. But, again, the unfortunate side of this, the but, we're not guaranteed that if some of these particular threats are actually long-term economic moves, that it's going to be beneficial to the economy and to the and to Americans in general. So that's just something to keep in mind. That's not sounding the alarm. That's not heaping tons of praise. That's a realistic, pragmatic look at economic policy. There's goods and bads baked into the cake because it's a really awful cake. It turns out that decades, no, a century of really bad economic decisions, both in the United States and on our gravy train brethren who have gotten to live as the good life because the United States rebuilt every one of their stinking European countries. It turns out those economic decisions have ramifications. And so we're all wading through that particular mess just the same. Now, if you're wondering how the Democrats are reacting to all of this, the reaction really boils down to poorly. And we've got Adam Wren over from Politico up next to reveal something I really couldn't believe got as little attention as it did, a leaked memo in which finally there were some Democrats who said, guys, maybe the whole LGBTQ plus thing and racial identity politics, maybe that ain't the way. So we're going to talk about that up next. This is the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. Don't go anywhere.
It's the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WIBC.
Hey, welcome back to the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal, first on 93 WIBC, joined by Adam Wren of Politico. I know that the chaos of the weekend kicked too many things to the side. One of those things that should not have, in my opinion, not been kind of front page news around the media is this playbook in which you outlined there was a group of moderate Democrats that might be suggesting a possible change in rhetoric and tone heading into the next couple of years. There's a lot of discord. Can you break it down for us a bit?
Yeah, so I caught wind of this prominent group of centrist Democrats who last month met in Loudoun County in suburban Virginia, and they got together to talk about just getting blown out in the election last November, and they were searching for a way to mount a comeback. And this group of prominent Democratic moderate elected officials, consultants, they got together and essentially decided that one of the things the party had difficulty with in November was connecting with working class voters. I mean, we saw 90% of all counties in the United States move rightward. And they diagnosed this as a problem with Democrats losing trust with working class folks around the country. And so they sort of listed kind of, 20 contributing factors and sort of 20 possible solutions. And, a lot of the contributing factors are what you would guess. Democrats are significantly connected to unpopular institutions like media, academia, government. We've seen, Democrats sort of side with government agencies like the USAID in response to the Doge cuts. And so, that connection is hurting them with a lot of voters. In addition, they are very identity politics focused, talking about, the groups, the constituencies that they have, rather than sort of more patriotic, defining, the politics of the moment in more patriotic terms. They diagnosed a number of these problems that the party had. And some of their solutions are pretty eye-popping. Some of their solutions are, having the party embrace patriotism more, attending, Friday night high school football games, going to tailgates, showing up at churches, finding ways to integrate themselves into where voters are in their everyday lives. Getting out of sort of their elite bubbles is something, that the party needs to do, they concluded. And another one I thought was interesting, being here near Indianapolis, is they conceded that, Democrats and the Democratic Party need to sort of own the failure that Democrats have had governing large cities like Indianapolis, like New York City, like Chicago and LA. And they just needed to say, look, we've messed up here, and find a way to improve local government.
Did they cite the unpopularity of like recent polling, or did they cite kind of a general uneasiness in national polling, or did they cite specific instances or policies? I guess there's a couple ways they could express.
Yeah, they
talking about owning and moving forward from that.
They sort of, took the polling that we've all seen, whether it was the result in November or, the Democratic brand being in the tank right now, being in the toilet, and they sort of, implicitly drew their conclusions from that. They didn't cite specific instances. We've seen Mayor Karen Bass in Los Angeles really struggle in the wake of the fires that ravaged her city earlier this year. And so they didn't specifically cite cases like that, but just sort of acknowledged that, there's a really big problem nationwide when it comes to how Democratic mayors and really, more largely Democratic politicians are perceived by the general populace.
I'm really glad that you brought that up, because the example that you cited was not one that was kind of itching in my head, but it was the poll showing that Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago was down at a 6% approval rating. And I was thinking, are they, if they're citing things, obviously I think the Mayor Karen Bass situation and the PR nightmare in that case is obviously going to be at the forefront. It's curious to see this taking what I would think is so long. And I've been saying this over and over, that I've been waiting for the official response. And when I saw from Ken Martin the memo that he dropped, that 5-page, this is our plan in response to Trump, I opened it up thinking what you just expressed in this moderate centrist Democrat meeting in Loudoun County was going to be those 5 pages. And it wasn't. And so my next question here is, was there any mention of the recent direction of the DNC under Ken Martin and David Hogg?
No. And, the DNC is actually, within the last 24 hours since I published this, the DNC is sort of very sensitive about this memo because they want to distance themselves from the results of this memo. They would stress that, this was done through no affiliation with them. This was done through Third Way, which is a Democratic 501c4, non-political nonprofit. And so the DNC is recently, the vice chair, Jane Kleeb, tweeted about this yesterday. They're saying that this is sort of not a direction that they want to go in, that they don't want the party, that they don't want the party to moderate on this. Of course, we're still waiting for this document from Ken Martin. He's promised an autopsy of what went wrong with the party last November, where they lost all branches of government, and so that hasn't happened yet. And so even though he's been in office for 2 to 3 weeks here, we've not yet seen that comprehensive document that he's promised. Of course, probably take a little bit of time to diagnose some of these problems.
Yeah, it's fair that something like that would take a little bit of time. You get into to diagnoses to autopsies of an entire nationwide election with a couple of micro regional differences, that's going to be quite the document. I understand that not being out in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that is clear to me after we published this story is how unsettled the Democratic Party is.
What do you mean?
In the sense that there's been a lot of pushback on the third way report that we published, that it's actually the wrong way to move forward after November's losses. So really, the progressives in the party haven't reconciled with the moderates since the November loss that the party sustained, and so there's still a lot of dust in the air. There's still a lot to be sorted out here, and I think in some ways it's less clear than it's ever been. I think the party is kind of holding on to this diagnosis that all incumbent parties saw losses last year across the globe due to record inflation, and they've really sort of stopped the diagnosis short there. They've said this is an inflation problem. We'll win back seats in the midterms, but we really haven't seen the depth of soul searching that you might expect. And if the soul searching has been done, there's no consensus on where it's led the party.
So I'm gonna scoot away from this to kind of a developing analysis. This has popped into my head while we're talking, so if it sounds a little uncouth, that might be why. But what I've noticed out of this memo that you talked about is that there are a group of Democrats, and I'm using the term group loosely because I don't know if some of these individuals are still talking. It was just at this one particular meeting that seemed to be moving away from the more identity-based politics that was consistent with the Democrats over the last couple of years to a more idealist style of politics. Whereas in response to the Trump-Vance meeting with Zelensky and Trump's handling of international negotiations in general, you've seen the more moderate, some might call them more establishment Republicans, moving towards a more identitarian politics with kind of base rote claims like, we stand with Ukraine in response to probably what Trump would outline as a more pragmatic approach to the negotiations. So I don't have a big cherry on top bold statement off of that, but it's very strange to see the moderate Republicans moving towards a little bit more of the identity politics, and then the moderate Democrats move towards more idealism.
Yeah, I think that that's the case if you're talking about foreign policy. I think it's interesting if you look at the Democratic governors in response to this Oval Office meeting that we saw on Friday. They all sort of released a statement here, condemning it and lamenting it. And I think that's interesting, for a few reasons, because Democratic governors by and large are more centrist and pragmatic than some of their congressional counterparts. They have
as are more state legislatures. We just mentioned that on the show last week.
Yeah, they have to work in many cases with red state legislators. They have to work across the aisle to get things done. You're seeing Governor Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan essentially offer all kinds of olive branches to the Trump administration, even though that she's kind of drawn some lines on tariffs and how it would impact manufacturing in Michigan. But you're seeing them, broadly, except for a few cases, maybe Governor Newsom in California and Governor Pritzker in Illinois. In most cases, they're taking kind of a third way tack where they're trying to work across the aisle wherever they can. So the fact that they came out and spoke about negatively about this meeting that J.D. Vance and President Trump had with Ukraine, Vice President J.D. Vance, it's remarkable. It says something. Either they're seeing something in the polling, or they are, sort of embracing this foreign policy idealism that you mentioned.
Well, that would be the question, looking ahead to midterms, because what we're now seeing, and talking to Scott Rasmussen on Inauguration Day, the question that I really wanted to know is, looking ahead to the midterms, have the molds been broken enough that instead of one issue driving the ballot box in the congressional races being the economy, now is there kind of a trifecta with international, like foreign policy, illegal immigration and crime, and the economy, looking at those things? And is any of this drastic, massive calculus going to be boiled down into some points that parties can coalesce around? I'm wondering if the Democrat governors, who seem to be kind of the last bastion of the bench, like the future of the Democratic Party at the national stage, are maybe coalescing around the foreign policy pushback, because they see that as, maybe for them and a lot of the party, the vast majority of that party, and its constituents, an easy foreign policy thing to coalesce around. The start of saying, hey, we can all unify on this. It's a point of opposition that isn't strange to the average Joe who doesn't steep in politics all day. That's kind of what I gleaned from it.
Yeah, one of the things from this third way memo that stuck out to me is sort of this embrace of patriotism. And, you can go back to the 1980s with Ronald Reagan, having his ad about Soviet Russia saying there's a bear on the loose and having B-roll of a bear sort of wandering around the woods. And you can see maybe, Democrats are sort of beating Republicans to that old sort of, Soviet versus the U.S. Cold War moment where they're moving towards Ukraine and they want to help Zelensky as a check against Vladimir Putin's Russia, and maybe they're sort of triangulating around Republicans on this foreign policy issue. It's hard to say at this moment. What we have seen is across voters and across battlegrounds, we've seen voters sour in some ways on foreign interventionism, particularly in Ukraine, and so it's not at all clear to me at this moment that voters are where Democrats are. I think there's some noise in the polling where you could make arguments either way, but certainly a fascinating moment. And I think that we're going to be hearing about the Oval Office meeting that took place on Friday for a long time to come. It was really a signal moment. I think for MAGA, this was everything that they had wanted out of a Trump presidency. They wanted kind of this America First doctrine. And I think, for Democrats, this is everything that they sort of feared. And so I think this is something we'll be talking about for a long time.
Adam Wren over at Politico. Appreciate your, sharing a little bit of this kind of inside look at this memo with us. Again, I know it didn't get the attention that it should. We're of course linking that down in the description. And again, thanks for taking a bit of time amidst the chaos and the lack of sleep we're all getting.
Anytime, Tony. Thank you.
We'll be back in just a second. It's the Tony Kinnett Cast here on the Daily Signal. All right, let's take things just a bit to the unhinged side of the political situation, because as calm and as normal as individuals may have been, I want to give you just a bit of encouragement here, just a bit here. No matter how crazy things get on the international stage, no matter how crazy the economy gets, no matter how absolutely wild foreign wars and conflicts and international leaders duking it out in Oval Office might be, the media and the Democrats in Congress are going to be so much worse. And you know what? That's the kind of reliable stuff you can count on. That's encouraging right there. And I'm going to show you how. So Representative Nydia Velázquez, Democrat from New York, has started yelling things about Elon Musk that I kind of thought were reserved for like parodies of Republicans. I'm not really sure how to frame up this clip, so it stutters in a little awkwardly. The clip's a little bit corrupted at the beginning, but don't you worry, she'll make it clear soon enough.
My question to Elon Musk, and what the hell are you doing here in America? Go back to South Africa.
Go back to South Africa. He's been a citizen of the United States for 20 years. By the way, this is one of the same representatives who has suggested it is morally evil to suggest that people should not illegally immigrate from Mexico, Central and South America. That is so ironic. It might be in the Alanis Morissette song, but I'll move on, because a lot of us out there know of Jasmine Crockett. She's a favorite on the show. I really enjoy whenever I get to share a clip of Jasmine Crockett. So many people were upset when Joy Reid was taken off the air at MSNBC because she was a place where we could all go and laugh at how awful the left was. What they didn't realize is that Jasmine Crockett had basically stolen her soul and took it to Capitol Hill. So our favorite Speedway crackhead, Jasmine Crockett, as a member of the United States Congress declaring that Trump is an enemy of the state. Here you go.
So, unfortunately, we have someone that is occupying the White House, and as far as I'm concerned, he is an enemy to the United States. He swore an oath just like the rest of us. But right now, when you are literally putting us at risk, all because of what? Because you want to convince your followers that you should be a dictator too, that you should never leave the White House because you don't believe that elections should take place. I don't really understand what is going on, and I don't know what it's going to take to get people to wake up.
I usually can pull a thread in which Democrats are saying this, that, the other, whatever it is, and I get it, right? Like, I see where you're coming from. It's wrong. It's unintelligent. It's very misplaced, both in your faith, trust, and your wisdom. But I can see where you're coming from. I listened with both ears. I was fully paying attention. My ADHD millennial brain deep fried in the craziest couple of months of news I could have imagined. I worked so hard to get what she was talking about. I have no idea. Putting us all at risk of what? What is he putting us at risk of not having elections? I mean, again, you're going to yell at Trump over Zelensky, Ukraine, whatever. Yeah, heard it. Same day, different nonsense. But you're going to now flip some random election. I don't even know where she's coming from. I hope so much that the DNC just lets her talk forever. Just lets her talk. Just go run on ahead. It is a gift to all of us. Not a gift to any of us, though, is the Oscars. No one watches the Oscars anymore. I suppose that Dune 2 and Wicked, the Part 1, were the only movies that anyone actually went and saw in the movie theater this last year because they never make anything decent anymore. Did Inside Out 2, the Disney movie, did that come out this year or did that come out last year? I can't remember because I never actually pay attention to any of the, any of the awards ceremony nonsense. And it's not for lack of trying. To be fair to me, it's not for lack of trying that I don't watch any of the awards stuff. It's that when I start watching, it's the red carpet time. And when I'm watching the red carpet time, they put up the saddest, goofiest looking bunch of mentally ill people to ever walk across the screen. Here is a lady who thinks she's a horse. Now, for those of you who are listening to the radio or the podcast, I'm not saying that this is just one of those weird girls in middle school who's obsessed with horses. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about she thinks and dresses like she is a horse.
Do you think British horses neigh differently than other horses?
Now, if I was first of all, I've gone to exactly one premiere in my entire life. I covered the Daily Wire premiere of Am I Racist? And it was all right. I could not do this job. I could not do this job where someone walks up to me. That's not a Snapchat filter. She's not. I looked later. Like, that's not her trying to be funny, like a mask from The Purge. She thinks she's got the makeup on and like with her eyes that she thinks she's a horse. And the reporter, who has a degree in journalism, asks her, quote, "Do you think British horses neigh differently than other horses?" That's it. We're done as a country. I mean, this is really the end of things. But anywho, let the horse answer the question.
Yeah, they do. I mean, they neigh more posh.
Could you give us a posh neigh? That was so...
Why? I don't want to talk about any of the speeches. Yeah, they got up there and they yelled about, the Gaza. And then then there was a guy who made a joke. Macaulay Culkin's little brother made a joke about, raising a family and having kids. That's great. I cannot make it past the red carpet nonsense that was presented in that moment. And as long as, you bet I'm going to tie this back into politics. As long as the left desperately clutches on to whatever this nonsense is, where you just, whatever you want to be, you can just believe and you're a dog or a horse or a multi-gendered polycule, then you're not going to be taken seriously by the voters. You're not. There could be an opposition right now that starts to the Trump administration, which, by the way, Kathy Hochul says that she's leading. I'm drawn to that clip from goodness gracious, it's that clip from the Arrested Development, in which case the bald guy yells, "There's dozens of us, dozens." That's what I'm unfortunately reminded of. I don't understand where this resistance, which has all the opportunity in the world to just be normal, they're still obsessed with being dogs and horses. It's just, I'm calling it, folks. That's the end of the show. I don't have the heart to tell you how you can reason with someone who whinnies in a different and more posh way than American horses whinny and neigh. We were going to talk about Mayor Wu of Boston, like patting a stabber on the back and wishing him condolences because he got shot. We're going to do it tomorrow. No more. You're cut off. Take care. This is the Tony Kennett Cast here on the Daily Signal. One more thing. We're doing Daily Signal's Top News at 10 now. Let me shut off the radio stuff. Yeah, Daily Signal, Top News at 10. Every morning at 5 a.m., I suffer through the latest headlines. You're driving to work, need a little something, go to the Daily Signal podcast, listen to Top News at 10. Maybe it'll be good, maybe it won't. Who's to say? All right, now we're done. Have a good evening.